Hello, and welcome to the Overcoming Podcast with your host, Adriana Lewin. Before we jump into today's episode, if you could please kindly subscribe to this podcast, and don't forget to follow me on Instagram at _Adriana_Lewin. Hello, and welcome to today's Overcoming Podcast. I'm super excited to bring on our new guest. With me today, we have Ana Marcela Rodriguez. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist. As y'all heard me, I did say it in Spanish because, as many of you don't know, Spanish was my first language and I've slowly have lost it, but her name is said the way that I said it. So I wanted to honor that. And she is the founder of Therapy Works Counseling in the Dallas Metroplex. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ana.
Thank you so much for having me. And I look forward for this conversation.
Well, I'm excited to have a conversation about the Latin American culture. We're obviously in Texas, and I wanted to hear a little bit of what you're seeing in your group practice when it comes to addressing mental health in the Latin American culture.
Well, yes, it has changed in the last few years, and after COVID, after we have this pandemic, and we have seen a lot of these mental health issues increase. We have seen that the Latin American culture is more open to receiving the help they need, and they are more open to mental health, to going to therapy. So that has been a great shift. However, we still have a lot of work to do. One of the biggest stigma, I will say, in our culture is asking for help. We don't want everyone else to know about our problems. We don't want our dirty laundry to be aired. So I think that's a huge obstacle for a lot of people. That's one. I will say another one is the knowledge about what is and what is not mental health, what is and what is not counseling or going to therapy. A lot of people do not know how therapy works, and the reach that therapy has, and the limitations that it has. To give you an example, we have a lot of people that will come to therapy, and after one session will ask us, like, there's no change, like I'm still depressed, or I'm still having these symptoms, like this is not working. So educating them on, okay, so one session won't do, it's a process, and it's the accumulation of the sessions and the things that you do outside that will give you a result. We also have people that think that they will come to counseling or to therapy and that they will lay down in a couch and they will be hypnotized and that their problems will be erased out of their mind. So psychoeducating them on, well, no, we do not do that. Like, you will come and sit and we'll have a conversation, and sometimes you will feel that it's like a regular conversation that you have with someone outside from here, but we're doing the work through that. And then we have other techniques, right, that are different from talk therapy, like EMDR or other things, more experiential or more didactic. But psychoeducation is a very important and crucial part of therapy with the Latin American culture.
It's interesting because being of Latin American descent, I I'm first generation here. I was born and raised here in the Dallas area, but my family is from Central America. And so I still have family that I communicate with back in Central America, and we talk about mental health. And it's just so interesting. I work a lot with people who have intergenerational trauma, right?
Yeah.
That for people who don't know what that is, it's like relational trauma, or just that concept of, your parents went through something, so therefore their behavior changed, and it's put, you can trace it back to so many ancestors, that the different experiences that change the dynamics of the family. And so we tend to run in this dysfunction. But in the Latin American culture, I feel like, one, there's a very high, and I may be completely wrong. Okay. So this might be completely off base, so you can correct me, but there's a very huge dependency on faith, one, right? So like religion is a huge thing, most people think, oh, they're Latin American, so they're got to be Catholic, but there's actually a lot more than that. So the dependence and expectation that I go to church, I'm just going to pray, I'm going to pray and pray and pray. I don't need a therapist, one. Two, the idea that you don't even recognize enmeshment, right? Or codependency, because you do have multiple generations at times living in one house, right? And it's in the Latin culture, it's like your parents take care of you, you're expected to turn around and take care of them. And I know it in the country where my parents are from, like it's frowned upon to have a parent be placed into nursing homes and stuff like that. But when you have so much, if you have a very complicated parent, right, who is just bitter and, just likes the drama, okay, and doesn't have a great relationship.
Or it's not a healthy one.
Or a healthy one, yeah. So it's an interesting, it's a challenge, I think, especially with people who are therapists in the United States, who are coming from this American culture where your mama doesn't live in the house with you. Like, no, right? But in the Latin American culture, that's pretty common, right? So how do you address that, the mental health aspect and codependency, and intergenerational trauma, not drama. But how do you address that in the Latin American culture?
Well, it's a very good question. I will start first with the part of faith. So even though many people will not practice Christianity, we align with the beliefs and the morals of Christianity. So in the Latin American culture, for example, till death do us apart is a strong belief. And that's one that makes a lot of couples stay together even when the relationship is not healthy or is dysfunctional, or even when they are experiencing domestic violence or abuse. Other beliefs that we have is to honor our parents, no matter how these parents are and how healthy or unhealthy they are. The belief of honoring them and being there for them is a very strong one. So people that decide to cut ties with their family, with their parents, are seen as not the good ones, and they are the ones that are alienated. So going against these beliefs it is hard. It takes a lot of work, and this is something that is very common in the Latin in the Latin American families. Also seeing the spiritual leaders like pastors, priests as the authority is something that that sometimes we struggle, because we as mental health providers, we have some knowledge about the psyche, about how relationships work. But if the priest or pastor doesn't believe in mental health, then we have a problem, because then we have this person that will not go to a mental health provider, that will, their first choice is first and foremost what the priest or the pastor says. We have seen a change, though, in the past years. We have seen, I personally have seen priests and pastors that are much more open to us, to therapists, to counselors, to psychiatrists, to telling their community about attending their mental health. So that's good. And that's something that I try to tell our community as well. The spiritual part and the psychological part are not in a battle.
Yeah.
Like, we need both. We need the physical health, the emotional health, the psychological health, and the spiritual health as well. So we're working on that. I think it's a work in progress. And one thing that has helped a lot is to have these open conversations with these leaders, with these church leaders, about mental health, about how can we unite in pro of the well-being of our community.
Yes. And you know, something that has come up for me in circles that, you know, when I am around Latin American people and they're starting to talk about, you know, I don't have trauma. I mean, that I've literally had people say, I don't have any trauma. I have no childhood trauma. Yet they sit there and say, you know, my mom has been this way with me. I have a parent who passed away when I was young, and I was in charge of being financially responsible for the whole family at a very young age. But what I see a lot of people bringing in, at least in certain circles that I've seen, a curandera. Okay.
Yes.
I don't really know. Is that like a witch doctor? Like, what is that exactly?
Like I think it's another word for like a healer.
Okay.
A holistic healer. I don't know the translation, but
okay.
I'm thinking it can be that.
Okay. So do you have a lot of clients that you see coming in and saying, well, you know, my curandera this and my curandera that, right? Like, they really, they rely heavily on this healer that they see that is not a doctor and is not a psychologist. And I really don't know what that looks like in their sessions, honestly.
Yeah. It's more kind of like a traditional, self-made, part of the culture healer. And a curandera, from what I know, is something that you're kind of like born with, kind of like this is your special gift that you have. Not everyone has it, so you're born with it, and you have the special gift of like healing others. And yes, we have had clients that believe and trust these nature healers. But we do have more people that believe in that praying, or that God will take out their mental health issues without them doing anything. I think the strongest belief is aligned in that.
In the faith, like the Christianity or some
Yes.
sort of deity. So what about the people who, there seems to be a lot of anxiety around almost like karma, the idea that you do good and good comes back to you. If you do bad, then it comes back to you as well, right? So there's a certain level of anxiety that I see with certain people that really kind of align with this idea. Like they're very heavily spiritual beings, right? And
Yeah.
even though it's not necessarily a Christianity type belief, there's still this heavy spiritual ideal that they carry with them that really drives how they move about the world.
Yeah, I mean, we have definitely clients that believe that maybe they are cursed, or maybe something they did, or they feel that life has been very unjust to them because they have been good people and not good things have happened to them.
Yeah.
And they lack sometimes the awareness of their responsibility in what is happening in their lives, or how their relationships are going. And going a little bit back to one of your questions about intergenerational trauma, and how people aren't aware that a lot of the things that they are talking about is actually like trauma, and not small trauma, like big trauma. That's also part of that therapeutic process with the Latin American culture, of this psychoeducation that labeling what their life experiences, labeling what they have gone through or what they are going through, and validating their experiences. This is something that I say to my clients, like, if you have lived in this earth for more than 10 years, probably you have one trauma or two. Like, this is just kind of like the price of being alive. You will have a trauma. It's impossible, I will say, to have not experienced any kind of trauma. And there are different kinds of traumas, of course. There are some that are much more severe than others, but the Latin culture, I will say, is not very good at understanding what trauma is, validating what it is, and knowing that a lot of the behaviors, beliefs, and how they live life is a consequence of the trauma that they lived.
Yes, yes. And, the idea that most people don't identify things as trauma. And even if you just remove the label, okay, I didn't suffer trauma. Great. But do you have any negative experiences that you have?
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's got to be a few in there, whether it's bullying, witnessing, domestic violence, and verbal abuse. And a lot of people don't like using the word abuse. It's like, I'm not a domestic violence victim. There's no abuse here. And I'm like, but the way that your spouse speaks to you, and controls you, that is considered abuse technically, right? Well, we don't have to call it that. That's if it makes you cringe, but it is what it is. And so, when I was in school, college, or whatever, and I actually minored in Spanish. I know I cheated. But I minored in Spanish. And one of the big things that they really talk about a lot in the books there is Marianism and machismo, right? Machismo. And I know that like countries are slowly becoming more in times with like similar ideals, I think, as the American culture, but I still think they are steps far behind, right? Because there is still a lot of that spirituality that takes place. And not saying that we don't have that in the American culture, but it's a very liberal culture here, right, in the United States. And I don't see as much of that in the Latin American culture. I still see women not being considered equal as their husband, still being very submissive to their husband. He might be the breadwinner. And so the idea of, people pleasing comes in,
Mhm.
right? And things
Mhm.
that are like in the culture, the machismo, some of that includes the idea of infidelity, right? Like men are seen as, well, it's a man, right? He has
Mhm.
a wife. It hurts, but it's almost a cultural thing, or is that no longer what you're seeing anymore?
I think it has been shifting.
Okay.
I mean, machismo and marianismo are still some ingrained beliefs that the culture has.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that men are superior and have these superior qualities than children and women are still something are still in the culture for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And they are not always expressed with violence.
Mm-hmm.
I gave usually when I give these talk in presentations, I give the example of my own family. In my family, we have very strong machista ideals where we serve the men in the
Mm-hmm.
house. We do not sit down to eat after if they have not been served. We take out the plates when they're done. You know, the
Yeah.
breadwinners are the men. Women are, even though right now they are much more open and you can work and do all of those things, still the responsibility of raising the children is uh, the responsibility of the women.
Mm-hmm.
So we still have that. And in my family, I did not experience domestic violence. Like my dad is a very gentle and a good man, but he has these machista ideas that
Mm-hmm.
that we are trying to cut that off, right? Or that
Mm-hmm.
my generation, my brothers, my siblings, and myself are trying to change that. But we have that ingrained. For me, it's still very difficult uh, to work and know that I have two young children. I still feel the responsibility, even though my husband does a lot of the things or the chores of the house and the things with my kids. Still, I believe that it's very ingrained in me.
Yeah. So I married a Latin American man. And he actually moved here when he was very young, like 5 years old, I think, 4 or 5. So he's very Americanized, like very Americanized. And it's interesting because I don't see as much machismo in him, right? He is all about, he helps cooking. He was the dad who was in there getting his hands dirty when, we were cleaning up diapers and
Mhm.
stuff like that. So but within my own family, the same, like, you serve the men, right? You make their meals. And to some extent, I do make meals for my husband, but he also will make meals for everybody else. So it's not, I'm always making the
Mhm.
meals and I can't sit down until he's been fed. And oftentimes I'll be like, I'm making this for dinner and he's walking in through the door and I'm like, can I make you one too? Because I never know when he's gonna get there in time. And I've got little kids who have activities. So it's like, you got to feed them in between certain gaps. And so sometimes we don't get to eat as a family, but he'll often just say, no, it's okay. Don't worry about me. I'll take care of myself. I'll make my own dinner. And I'm like, okay, so it's a different dynamic, but within my family, it's literally like some men don't know how to cook,
Yeah, exactly.
because the wife is the one taking care of them. And it's almost so the people pleasing. I feel like people pleasing kind of comes in here and this sense of identity, right? And I'm wondering how much that influences mental health when, even though it's a cultural expectation, it kind of shifts away from that like internal need to be an individual that has a sense of self and autonomy, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, and more so for women. I think for Latin women, the pleasing others is an expectation from our culture. And it is an expectation that holds also a lot of other beliefs. Like you should say yes to others because that makes you, that's that validates that you're a woman. That is part of your worth, that you serve others. So if you start putting boundaries and saying no, you're going against these family traditions, these values, these worth that the community and the culture has installed in you. It's not easy to set boundaries as a Latin American woman. I mean, I know it for myself. I know it with my clients as well. It's swimming against the current. So the support that therapy can give you, the tools that therapy can give you, the safety net that therapy can give you to do this, I think it's a crucial part to empower these women.
Oh, setting those boundaries in the Latin American culture. How do you...
And it's not always safe, you know, because a lot of people will say, well, just, for example, children that are parentified, right? We have we have in the Latin American culture many children that have to play an adult role because of the language. For example, their parents do not speak English. These children do speak English, and they have to translate important, not children conversation to their parents. And that's a way of parentified children, right? So if we as therapists give tools to these children and help them set boundaries and tell them to say no to their parents, imagine the consequences out there. These children cannot just say no to their parents. Their parents will I don't know, we'll tell them you have to do it, or this is not an option, or this is your obligation, or I mean, and this is like the nice part of consequences. There are other type of consequences where it's abuse or other things if we have children that start to set these strong boundaries. So we have to be very careful in what we tell also our clients, and we need to understand the culture, right? It's not for children in Latin American families to say no to their parents, or even with women, right? Women, for example, that do not have a job, that do not have financial independence. How can they stand up to their partner and say no if their no will mean that they will not have food tomorrow for themselves or their children? So setting boundaries is not as easy as it might seem.
Right. And even the idea, like what psychology says, these are poor boundaries. It doesn't necessarily translate into the Latin culture.
Exactly. For example, one example that I give to my in my talks is in Mexico. I'm Mexican, so in Mexico it's very common and very normal that you live with your parents until the day that you get married. Like it's not dysfunctional. This is not the failure to launch. This is just part of our culture. So we have adults that live with their parents because they have not gotten married, and they will get out of their house until that moment. Knowing that part of the culture will make you a better competent therapist, because if you stay with the idea that, oh, she's 27 and she's still living with their parents, something might be wrong, I think you're missing the point. Maybe that's not even a problem. That's just part of how things work.
Oh my gosh, I could not imagine living at home with my mom till 27.
I know, right? But for a lot of people, that it's completely healthy and functional.
Yeah. I mean, I love my mom, right? But two strong personalities under one roof. Ooh. Woo,
I know. I know.
a constant
And
battle.
it can have other consequences, right? I married young. I married when I turned 22, so I was very young. But I think now that I'm much more older, I'm almost 15 year. Our anniversary is in July, and we're turning 15 years of marriage. So I have been married for 15 years, and I think now that I reflect on my decision of getting married, is one of the things that pushed me in a way to get married is because I didn't want to live with my parents anymore. And in my culture, it's not well seen to live on your own or go to live with your boyfriend. Like, the only option I had is, if I want to live on outside of my parents' house, is to get married.
Yeah. That's something I see in the people that I grew up with. So my mom is Guatemalan, my dad is Salvadorian, but my mom lived in El Salvador for a long time. So a lot of the friends in our circles, the same thing, right? They're still living at home until they get married. And it's almost like you're saying, like, you never have the opportunity to be out on your own, to learn yourself, right? To like become this independent person, get confident, which not everybody gets that, right? I get that. Right. But this specific situation where people are not leaving home until they're married, like you said, I've seen it drive people into not seeing the red flags or ignoring the red flags.
Yeah, exactly. Or making quick decisions or poorly decisions. For me, it has been a great decision, and I'm truly happily married. But I can see that my decision was also pushed by the wanting of being independent, and that being my only option.
Yeah.
So, and if you flip the coin, then you also have, for example, here in America, where you're 18, you must leave the house. It doesn't matter if you prepare or not, independent or not. And in our culture, you don't have that pressure. 18-year-old young adults are still seen as teenagers, are still very pampered and nurtured and embraced by their family of origin. So I think the flip of the coin, it's a good thing, right? It just depends how you see it, and it also depends on your family dynamics, right?
That's true. I'm like, I will build a little teeny tiny house or something outside of my house and be like, that is your little tiny cabin out there. I'll put a potty or something in it so you can make sure and be able to use a bathroom, and it's your own space. No, but I get it, right? Like that idea of, but here, I guess, I feel like here the pressure, and it may be changing now that, people are saying, oh my gosh, how expensive it is to go to college. But here the pressure really is, when you graduate and you turn 18, go to college and go be stupid and wild and, a child. Oh my goodness. It's like getting your freedom for the first time and not knowing what to do with it.
Exactly. And making these adult decisions that will impact the rest of your life at 18. That's a lot of pressure.
It is, especially when we know that the logic side of our brain, right? Or the frontal lobe doesn't finish forming until we're like 24, 25.
Exactly.
So literally they're children out there who have 6 more years until their brain finishes maturing, a lot of responsibility. So do you guys see a shift? And I think women might have a little more openness to come to therapy, but what about the men in the Latin American culture? What is that looking like?
Yeah, I think women are more open, and they continue to be more open. I also see that if it's for their children, people tend to do it quicker, right? If it's my child, the one that needs help, and someone is telling me to go to a counselor or to a therapist, they will bring them right away, right? If it's for themselves, then they wait more. And sometimes they wait very long to come to therapy, but they do. And men, I think it's the population that waits the longest. There's still a lot of stigma and a lot of I think lack of knowledge of mental health in men, and more so in the Latin culture. So I think we have to do a better job with them. Give me a second.
Yeah, while you cough, I'll just take a minute and chime in. So individually, there's still a lack of knowledge, right? And then I'm wondering, how do you even begin to address a marriage situation, right? I feel like I'm of the mindset that yes, you can do marriage therapy, but I do think unless both people are doing their part to heal those childhood wounds and traumas and negative experiences, it's really hard to get the marriage to a place of, wholeness, right? So in the Latin American culture, if men are struggling to go into therapy and they're like, we need a marriage therapist, like, what does that even look like?
Yeah, I think it stems from the idea that going to therapy or needing mental health providers is a weakness. We have to change that. And more so for men, I think there's a lot of shame on needing counseling or therapy services. So think that to say you're very strong and very courageous because you're seeking help and you're asking for help, that's the shift that has to happen. That hopefully it will happen in the next years. And people, couples that come to therapy, there's much more success when both of them see the need for therapy and are willing to do the work. When we have one member of that partnership that comes because the other one puts an ultimatum on them, then it usually doesn't work. Usually one has already won food outside the marriage, or they do not believe that therapy will help them. And if they believe that therapy will not help them, it won't help them. So having that openness to couples therapy, I think, is a key element for the success of therapy.
When a couple decides to divorce, what is the experience like for the women who are now, I mean, they kind of go against the cultural norm, right? Like you stay with your husband, you work it out. Even if he's unfaithful, you work it out. So what happens to the women who decide, I've had enough. Like, I'm not going to put myself in this situation. I'm a cycle breaker, right? Like I'm breaking the cycle. I know I want better for myself. What happens?
First, if they are in therapy and they decide to divorce, they see it as a failure. They see it as therapy did not work for us. They see it as a personal failure as well, as a failure from the therapist that did not do her magic or his magic.
It's your fault.
Exactly. So a lot of pointing fingers, of guilt. I think women experience a lot of shame and guilt, not only from their family and the culture, but also from themselves, because we have invaded in us this belief that we will be in this partnership till death do us apart.
Mm-hmm.
So we are not, we are cutting that commitment. I think sometimes the family will not support these women and the decision of getting divorced. So they need that support from the community, from friends, from the workplaces. Mm-hmm. These women are very courageous because it's not just going through the grief of losing these marriage or this couple, this partner, the grief of losing the family as they known, the grief of the expectations. It's also living with the shame of not being good enough for their community, for their culture, mm-hmm. for their religion. It's a lot.
That is tough. I feel like it's a little more common and accepted here, right?
Yes.
In the American culture, but in that Latin American culture, like it's a little more complicated. So,
yes.
Well, what would you like for people to know who are Latin American and know that, you know, there is dysfunction, yet they excuse it, right? Like it's like the idea of, one, I don't want to go there because it's, you know, too much to unpack, or you excuse it because that is the cultural norm. Like, so it's almost like you don't have a right to be upset about it. Like, mm-hmm. It's like, suck it up. This is what the culture does. This is not uncommon. So, but the people who are afraid to go to therapy, and they are Latin American, because they don't feel like there are going to be people who understand their culture, and also maybe they're not ready to see that maybe what they grew up with was dysfunctional. I know it's kind of a big, long-winded question. Sorry.
I will say that look for therapists that understand your culture, and that if you're, for example, Spanish speaker, that know your language and speak your language, you will feel more comfortable and connected to someone that is more similar to you. Mm-hmm. Therapy is confidential, so you don't have to tell your friends or family or whatever that you're going. If you decide to keep it as something private, you can. So, and also gift yourself a therapeutic process, even if it's once in your lifetime. Don't, I think everyone deserves and needs at least one therapeutic process in their lifetime. It changes your life. It gives you a different perspective. It can heal you. It can help you be better with others, with your relationship, with yourself. It ultimately, I think it gives you a sense of peace that we all are looking for. I think for me personally, what therapy has given me is it has changed my life. I wouldn't be who I am as a therapist, as a mother, as a spouse, as a friend, as an owner, as a co-worker. In every area of my life, it has had a huge impact. And I can see the fruits of it. I can see how my relationships are better, how I feel better, and how I can do also better.
I love that. You just made me think of one more question. One more question, I promise. in the Latin American culture, in certain societies, right, there are nannies, right? Helpers in
Yeah.
the household. And obviously not everybody has that, because I know in Latin American culture there's a lot about the social caste system, but
Yeah.
it's very common for middle class, upper class to have nannies for their kids.
Yes.
My curiosity, in your population, do you notice a correlation with any sort of attachment wounds with families who have nannies that are responsible for the caregiving?
Yeah, definitely. Um, that's much more common than what we think of. And not only with the nannies, but we have grandparents as caregivers,
That too.
other family members as caregivers, and not their parents.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of parents that do not grow, that are not involved in the child life, and the wound and the lack of that creates attachment wounds for sure.
Wow. I'm like, that's just something. I know I have siblings who were born in a different country and they lived there till they were like 10, 12 years old. And so I've always kind of wondered, like, what was life like for them, right? Like having nannies and, because I had my mom at home all the time when I was born here in the States. So, and that's actually something else I would love to talk about at another point is
Yeah.
I guess they call it, hold on, third culture, not third
Yes.
world, but third
No.
culture.
Third culture, exactly. Yes,
Which that is me.
Yes, exactly. That's something that we have been seeing much more of, like first generation, second generations, that are not from here nor from there. And they are creating this other culture, right? Which is the third culture.
Ooh, we'll have to have another conversation around that, because I could talk all day long about being third culture.
Oh my God, yes. And another one on attachment, I'm thinking right now that you asked me that last question, all the attachment wounds and attachment styles that our culture experienced because of immigration, for example.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, we'll have to dive into that too, because like it's just a different world that people don't see when you've got immigration involved. And
Yeah,
we'll have to dive into that plus like third culture, because that is an interesting one. So, well, Miss Ana Marcela Rodriguez, thank you so much for joining me today. I had such a pleasure chatting with you.
Me too. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias por esta entrevista. Thank you so much.
De nada. That is one of the few words my kids are learning. De nada. So, well, thank you so much. And if you guys have any questions and want to know more about Ana Marcela Rodriguez's services, you can visit her website at www.therapyworkscounseling.com. And you can also find her on social media. What is the best tags for them to follow you on social media?
In Instagram is Therapy Works Ana. In Facebook, Therapy Works Counseling. In TikTok, Therapy Works Counseling as well. And if you go to our webpage, you will find all the links for all of our social media.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you so much for today. And I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.